The billionaire was getting into his Ferrari when his twin daughters shouted, "Don't get in the car, stepmom cut the brakes." Startled, he dialed 911. The wind carried the sweet aroma of ripe grapes as Thomas Everly adjusted his tie for the third time that morning. At 40 years old, he had closed dozens of deals, but something about this one made him uneasy. Maybe it was Leo Maddox's audacious proposal, or maybe it was just the natural anxiety of someone about to make a life-altering decision. "You're nervous." Vanessa appeared in the doorway of the office with that smile that always calmed him. At 26, she had a contagious energy that perfectly complemented his more reserved personality. "I'm not nervous," Thomas lied, running a hand through his hair. "Just thoughtful. This is an amazing opportunity, hun." She came closer and lovingly straightened his tie. "Maddox Industries has connections we can only dream of. Imagine our winery being distributed all over the West Coast." Thomas nodded. Leo Maddox had appeared out of nowhere 3 weeks ago, interested in forming a partnership. The man spoke with conviction about expansion, unexplored markets, and profits that could make any business owner's eyes shine. It was too tempting to be true. "Has he arrived yet?" Thomas looked out the window toward the main entrance. "He just called." "He's 5 minutes away." Vanessa checked her watch. "I prepared everything like you asked. The table's set on the terrace with a view of the vineyards. And I chose that 2018 Cabernet you're so proud of." Thomas smiled. Vanessa always paid attention to details. When they got married 2 years ago, she knew nothing about wine, but she learned quickly. She made a point of participating in every major decision, always with well-founded opinions. "Are the girls okay?" "They're playing in the garden. I promised they could meet the important man after lunch if they behaved." Vanessa laughed. "Sadie's already making up stories about how he's probably rich enough to own a castle." And Nora said she'll ask if he has horses. Thomas chuckled softly. The twins were his light after 2 dark years. Losing Sarah had been devastating, but Sadie and Nora kept him going. They were curious, smart, and had a unique view of the world that always surprised him. The sound of tires on gravel announced Leo's arrival. Thomas took a deep breath and headed to the entrance, Vanessa by his side. Leo Maddox stepped out of a gleaming black BMW, wearing a suit that probably cost more than many families' monthly income, tall, grey hair neatly combed, a confident smile. He had exactly the look of a successful man. "Thomas!" Leo extended his hand enthusiastically. "What a magnificent property! The pictures don't do it justice." "Thank you. This is my wife, Vanessa. A pleasure to meet you." Leo kissed Vanessa's hand politely, but not excessively. "Thomas has told me a lot about you. Said you have an exceptional vision for business." Vanessa blushed slightly. "He exaggerates, but I try to help however I can. Modesty is a rare quality these days." Leo smiled. "Shall we get down to business?" Thomas guided them to the terrace. The view was truly spectacular. Perfect rows of vines stretching as far as the eye could see, with mountains in the distance creating an almost cinematic backdrop. "Impressive," Leo murmured, clearly admiring. "How many acres?" 250. My grandfather started with just 20. A family history. That's priceless in today's market." Leo sat at the table and accepted the glass of wine Vanessa offered. "People want authenticity, tradition. That's exactly what we're looking for." During the appetizer, an arugula salad with walnuts and local goat cheese, Leo talked about his company, distributors in 12 states, contracts with major hotel chains, plans for international expansion. Every word was calculated to impress. "Our proposal is simple," Leo said as he cut into his grilled salmon. "We invest in expanding production, and you keep creative control. In 5 years, your brand will be on shelves across the country." "And what exactly would the initial investment be?" Thomas asked. $2 million to start. New equipment, hiring specialized staff, marketing campaigns." Leo paused for a sip of wine. "In return, we get 40% of the company." Vanessa almost choked on her water. 40%? "I know it seems like a lot," Leo said quickly, "but consider the growth potential. In 2 years, your 40% will be worth more than your current 100. Thomas chewed slowly, processing the information. It was a risky proposal, but Leo wasn't wrong about the potential. I need to think. Of course. It's an important decision. Leo leaned back in his chair. But don't take too long. We have other properties interested, and opportunities like this don't come often. Vanessa leaned forward. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Ideally, an answer by the end of the week. Leo smiled. I know it's fast, but the market won't wait. Joyful shouts of children echoed from the garden. Thomas looked toward the voices and saw Sadie and Nora running among the fruit trees, their blonde hair flying in the wind. They looked like two fairies in a fairy tale. Are they your daughters? Leo asked, following Thomas's gaze. Sadie and Nora, 5-year-old twins. Beautiful girls. They must be your number one priority. Thomas nodded. Always. That's exactly why this partnership makes sense, Vanessa said, gently touching her husband's arm. We want to give them the best future possible. This opportunity could ensure that... Leo raised his glass. To the future, then. Thomas hesitated only a second before toasting. The wine was perfect, the day was beautiful, and the proposal was tempting. Everything seemed to fit perfectly. While they finished dessert, peach pie made from Thomas's grandmother's recipe, the twins approached the table shyly. Daddy, can we meet the visitor now? Sadie asked, holding her sister's hand. Of course, princesses. This is Mr. Maddox. Leo bowed theatrically. It's an honor to meet two such lovely princesses. The girls giggled, but Thomas noticed they stayed close to him, as they always did with strangers. You have a beautiful family, Leo said, standing up. I hope we can work together to build something special. After Leo left, Thomas stayed on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the vineyards in gold. Vanessa joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. What do you think? She asked softly. It's a big decision, but a good opportunity. Thomas hugged his wife, breathing in the familiar lavender scent in her hair. We'll see. In the garden, Sadie and Nora kept playing, their laughter echoing in the late afternoon breeze. Everything seemed perfect, promising, full of possibilities, if only he knew what was coming next. The meeting with Leo Maddox left Thomas with conflicting feelings. As he put the proposal documents back into his leather briefcase, he tried to organize his thoughts. 40% was a significant chunk of everything his family had built for generations. On the other hand, the expansion Leo proposed could transform Everly Winery into something far bigger than his grandfather had ever dreamed. So, Vanessa entered the office after seeing Leo to his car. I think it went well, right? Thomas lifted his eyes from the papers. He's persuasive, I have to admit. Persuasive? Vanessa came closer, sitting on the edge of the desk. Thomas, he's offering exactly what we need: expansion, national distribution, potential international markets, at the price of almost half the company. Vanessa sighed, running her hand through her dark hair. You need to think about the future. The girl's future. Thomas studied his wife for a moment. In their 2 years of marriage, Vanessa had always shown genuine concern for the twins, even though she wasn't their biological mother. It had been a blessing to find someone who accepted not just him, widowed at 38, but also 2 young children who still missed their mom. I am thinking about them, he finally replied. That's exactly why I can't make rash decisions. Leo won't wait forever. He even said there are others interested. Basic sales pressure, Thomas smiled, standing up. Let's give it some time. I have a meeting with our accountant tomorrow. I want to hear his take on the numbers. Vanessa crossed her arms, visibly frustrated. Sometimes you're too cautious. That's what's kept me in business all these years. Thomas kissed his wife lightly on the forehead. I'm going to walk around the property. I need to think. Will you take the girls? No. They were exhausted. The nanny said she already put them to bed. Thomas checked his watch. It was past 8 in the evening. I won't be long. As he walked among the rows of grapevines, Thomas felt the cool California night air envelop him. There was something calming about being there, touching the same plants his father and grandfather had tended. Leo's proposal meant expansion, maybe buying adjacent land, hiring more people. The winery would cease to be a family-run business and become a much larger commercial operation. Was that really the legacy he wanted to leave for Sadie and Nora? Thomas reached the natural lookout at the highest part of the property. From there, he could see the entire stretch of vineyards, the main house with its welcoming lights, and the starry sky above. It was his favorite spot to think. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Vanessa. "The girls woke up asking for you. They're restless. When are you coming back?" Thomas quickly typed, "On my way. 10 minutes." As he headed down the hill toward the house, Thomas felt a pang of guilt. Ever since Sarah's death 3 years ago, he had buried himself in work to cope with the pain. The twins, then only 2 years old, needed him so much, and often he wasn't emotionally present. Vanessa had arrived like a ray of light, taking on many maternal responsibilities, giving him space to breathe. Maybe she was right about Leo's proposal. Maybe it was time to take a bold step. When he reached the house's entrance, Thomas noticed the office lights were still on. Vanessa was probably working on one of the interior design projects she did as a freelancer. She had put her career on hold to devote herself to his family. Another reason to be grateful. Thomas decided not to go through the main door, so as not to wake the girls if they had gone back to sleep. He walked toward the attached garage where his red Ferrari F8 Tributo was parked next to Vanessa's SUV. The sports car had been his only extravagance after a particularly profitable year 3 years ago. Sarah never got to see it. He opened the garage door with the remote and walked up to the car, twirling the keys on his index finger. The meeting with Leo, the conversation with Vanessa, the walk through the vineyards, all of it spun in his mind as he approached the vehicle. Thomas opened the car door and was about to get in when he heard them. High-pitched, desperate screams coming from the garage entrance. "Daddy! Daddy! No!" Thomas turned around, surprised to see Sadie and Nora running toward him, still in their pajamas, their faces twisted in pure terror. "Don't get in the car." "Stepmom, cut the brakes." Sadie's words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He was paralyzed for a second, his brain trying to process what he had just heard. "What?" It was all he managed to say, while the girls clung to his legs. "She cut the brakes," Nora repeated, tears streaming down her face. "We heard her talking on the phone." Thomas looked at the car, the key still in his hand. Could it really be that Vanessa? No. It had to be some misunderstanding. The girls must have heard incorrectly, misinterpreted a conversation. But the terror in their eyes was real. Thomas knelt down, hugging them both tightly. "It's okay, princesses. It's okay. I won't get in the car." "She wants to hurt you," Sadie sobbed. "She said it would be an accident." Thomas's blood ran cold. He looked again at the car, then at the door leading into the house. There was no sign of Vanessa. "Go back to your room," he whispered to his daughters. "Pretend you're asleep. They'll take care of this, I promise." "You won't get in the car?" Nora asked, her blue eyes so much like her mother's, pleading. "I won't. I promise. Now go, quickly and quietly." The girls hesitated for a moment but then ran back inside. Thomas stood up slowly, his mind racing to put the pieces together. Could it really be possible? Carefully, he approached the car again. He slid into the driver's seat without closing the door. He wouldn't start it, of course, but he needed to check. He turned on the electrical system only, checking the instrument panel. Everything looked normal. With slightly trembling hands, Thomas grabbed his phone. He hesitated for a moment, then dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" The woman's voice on the other end sounded calm and professional. "I need to report a possible attempt at..." Thomas swallowed. The words sounded absurd. "I suspect my car's brakes have been tampered with." "Are you safe, sir?" "Yes, I didn't get in the car. My daughters warned me." "What's your address, sir?" Thomas provided the details of Everly Winery. The dispatcher promised a patrol car would be there in under 10 minutes, as there was one nearby. After hanging up, Thomas remained seated in the car, his mind in turmoil. Part of him wanted to believe this was all a horrible misunderstanding. Maybe the girls had watched some inappropriate TV show. Maybe they had a nightmare, but the fear in their eyes was too real. Thomas got out of the car and walked to the front of the vehicle. He knelt and tried to look underneath, but the garage lighting wasn't bright enough for a proper inspection. He wasn't a mechanic, but he knew the basics about cars. If someone had cut the brake lines, there should be visible signs. Thomas, what's going on? Vanessa's voice made him turn quickly. She stood in the door connecting the garage to the house, wearing the blue silk robe he'd given her for her birthday. Her face showed genuine surprise and concern, or was it the perfect mask? Were the girls awake? Vanessa asked, taking a few steps toward him. I heard voices. Thomas stood up slowly, watching every detail of his wife's expression. They came down here. Why? What happened? Thomas hesitated. Should he confront her directly? Without proof, relying only on the testimony of the girls? They were worried about me, he answered vaguely. Vanessa frowned. Worried? Why? Before Thomas could answer, blue and red lights lit up the garage entrance. The police had arrived with surprising speed. Thomas, why is there a police car here? Vanessa's voice rose an octave. What's going on? Two officers approached, a slightly older man with grey hair and a younger woman with a serious expression. Mr. Heverlicher, said the older officer. I'm Sergeant Reeves. We received a call about a possible sabotage to a vehicle. Vanessa's eyes widened. Sabotage? Thomas, what is he talking about? Thomas took a deep breath. My daughters warned me someone might have tampered with my car's brakes. What? Vanessa sounded genuinely shocked. Who would do such a thing? The younger officer walked over to the Ferrari. Is this the vehicle in question? Thomas nodded. Yes, it's an F8 Tributo, 2021 model. We'll need a tow truck to take it in for forensics, said Sergeant Reeves. In the meantime, we'd like to ask a few questions. Vanessa stepped forward. Is this some kind of joke? We're talking about our private property. You can't just take our car without a warrant. Ma'am, the young officer said calmly, we have a report of a possible homicide attempt. That gives us the authority to investigate immediately. Homicide? Vanessa put a hand to her mouth. My God, Thomas, what is happening? Thomas remained silent, observing her every reaction. Surprise, indignation, fear, all appropriate emotions for the situation. But something in her eyes looked calculated. Or was it just his imagination, fueled by his daughter's terrifying words? The officers requested permission for a preliminary inspection of the vehicle, which Thomas granted immediately. Using powerful flashlights, they examined the underside of the car. Mr. Everly, the female officer called after a few minutes. Can you come here for a moment? Thomas approached and knelt beside her. She pointed the flashlight at a specific spot under the car. See this? It's the brake line. It looks like it was partially cut. Not completely, which means the brakes would still work at first but fail under pressure. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. So it was true. It wasn't just the girl's imagination or a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately tried to cause an accident. When he stood and looked at Vanessa, she was pale. That's impossible, she stammered. Who would do this? Thomas, someone's trying to kill you. Her performance was perfect. The tremor in her voice, the panicked look, even the way her hands nervously gripped the robe's belt. If not for the girl's words, Thomas would have completely believed her. We'll need you both to come down to the station to give statements, Sergeant Reeves said. And we'll need to speak with your daughters too, Mr. Everly. They're only 5, Thomas replied automatically, parental instinct kicking in. We understand, sir. We have specialists trained to talk to children. It will be handled with the utmost care. Vanessa approached Thomas, lightly touching his arm. This is crazy. Who could want to harm you? Thomas looked at her hand on his arm. The same hand that possibly held the tool that cut his brake lines. The same touch that, until a few hours ago, had brought him comfort and safety. I don't know, he replied coldly, subtly stepping away. But I intend to find out. The following days were a blur of statements, forensics, and interrogations. Police confirmed what they already suspected. The Ferrari's brakes had been intentionally sabotaged. A partial, precise cut that would ensure the system failed when the car reached high speed or needed to brake hard. During the formal statement, Thomas chose not to mention his daughter's specific accusations. Without concrete evidence, it would be the word of 2 small children against that of an adult. He needed more before openly accusing his own wife. Vanessa, for her part, played the worried wife role to perfection. Tears at the right moments, appropriate outrage, theories about potential business enemies, everything carefully calculated to deflect suspicion. "It could be someone jealous of your success," she suggested over breakfast 3 days after the incident. "Or maybe someone who doesn't want you to close the deal with Leo." Thomas watched her carefully as she spoke. Since that night, he had begun noticing small details, how she checked her phone with unusual frequency, how her stories about where she'd been or what she'd done sometimes had minor inconsistencies, how she subtly tried to influence his decision about Leo's proposal. "Speaking of which," Vanessa continued, spreading jam on toast, "Leo called yesterday. He wanted to know if everything's okay and if you've made a decision on the proposal." "He called you directly?" Thomas asked, keeping his tone neutral. Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second. "No, he called the office, and Martha transferred him to me since you were at the station." Another tiny inconsistency. Martha, the secretary, had taken the day off yesterday. "I'll call him later," Thomas replied vaguely. "I think we should accept," Vanessa said, leaning forward. "After all this, it'd be good to have a strong partner like Maddox Industries." Thomas nodded slowly, pretending to consider. "Maybe you're right." Vanessa's eyes briefly shone before she controlled her expression. "I'm only thinking of your best interests." "Of ours." "I know." That night, once the girls were in bed, Thomas stayed alone in the office, mentally revisiting everything that had happened. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a disturbing picture. Leo Maddox's sudden arrival, his abrupt interest in Everly Winery, which, while successful, wasn't exactly a national name. Vanessa's insistence on accepting the proposal, her unusual urgency, and now the sabotage that would conveniently have taken him out of the picture. If he died in a car accident, Vanessa would inherit his share of the winery. As the twins' legal guardian, she'd also control their shares until they came of age. And if she was already negotiating with Leo, perhaps it wasn't a coincidence that Leo had called her directly. Thomas felt his stomach sink. How had he been so blind? How had he failed to see that the woman he'd married, the one he trusted with his children, could be capable of something so calculated and cruel? But there was still no definitive proof. And Thomas knew he had to tread carefully. If his suspicions were correct, Vanessa was far more dangerous than she appeared. For now, he'd maintain the facade of normalcy, pretend he believed in her innocence, observe, listen, gather evidence, and above all, protect Sadie and Nora. They, in their innocence and love, had already saved his life once. Because if there was one thing Thomas Everly would never forget, it was the terror in his daughter's eyes that night in the garage, the genuine terror of children who'd uncovered a terrible truth. Sometimes the monster doesn't hide under the bed or in the closet. Sometimes the monster wears the face of someone we pretend to love. Thomas spent the rest of the afternoon locked in his office, alternating between calls with his attorney and reviewing the contract for Leo Maddox's proposal. With every line he reread, more dark connections formed in his mind. Clauses about property succession, contingencies for unforeseen circumstances. Everything seemed deliberately vague and potentially dangerous. At 5 in the afternoon, he heard hesitant knocks at his door. It was Rosa, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over a decade. "Mr. Thomas, the girls are asking for you. They wouldn't eat dinner." Thomas rubbed his tired eyes. "Thanks, Rosa. I'll see them now." "Sorry to ask, sir, but is everything okay?" The little ones seemed frightened. Thomas hesitated. Rosa was loyal and trustworthy, but he wasn't ready to share his suspicions yet. Not fully. "We're going through a difficult time, that's all." Rosa nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. "Mrs. Vanessa left about an hour ago. She said she was meeting a friend and might be back late. Thanks for letting me know." Thomas tried not to show his relief. A moment alone with his daughters was exactly what he needed. He climbed the stairs to the twins' room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see them sitting on the colorful rug listlessly playing with their dolls. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Can I come in, princesses?" Identical faces turned to him, lighting up instantly. "Daddy!" they exclaimed in unison, running to hug him. Thomas knelt down, opening his arms to receive them. The weight of their small bodies against his chest, the smell of kids' shampoo, the warmth of their embraces, everything brought a wave of emotion that nearly overwhelmed him. These were the people he would live for, the ones he would fight for. "Rosa told me you wouldn't eat dinner," he said gently, pulling back to look them in the eyes. "We're not hungry," Sadie said, the more talkative of the two. "And why not?" The girls exchanged glances, that silent communication only twins seem to master. "We're scared," Nora finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas felt his heart tighten. "Come on, let's sit down for a bit." He stood and walked over to Sadie's bed, sitting on the edge. The girls climbed up, one on each side of him. Thomas put his arms around their shoulders, pulling them closer. "You can tell me anything," he said gently. "Anything. Understand? I'll never be mad at you for telling the truth." Again, that look passed between the twins. "Is it about her?" Thomas asked, knowing he didn't need to specify who her was. Sadie nodded slowly. "She's mean, Daddy." "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" "She says bad things when you're not around." Thomas took a deep breath, bracing himself. "What kind of bad things?" "She talks on the phone," Nora began, her voice low. "To a man." "Do you know who that man is?" "She calls him Leo," Sadie answered. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. "And what does she say to this Leo?" The girls hesitated again. Nora looked down while Sadie bit her lower lip. "It's okay," Thomas encouraged them. "Remember, you can tell me anything." "She said she can't stand us anymore," Sadie finally said, tears shining in her eyes. "That she doesn't like kids." Thomas felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "When did she say that?" "Last night," Nora answered. "She thought we were asleep, but we were playing hide and seek." "And she was in the hallway?" "In the office," Sadie clarified. "The door was open just a little. We were hiding behind the big couch." Thomas nodded, encouraging them to continue. "She said that after—" Nora paused, searching for the right words. "After you were gone, she'd send us to a boarding school," Sadie supplied. "She said she'd send us to a faraway boarding school." Thomas clenched his fists unconsciously, trying to control the anger welling up inside him. "What else did she say?" The twins exchanged another look before Sadie continued. "She asked if the brakes had already been cut." Those words, spoken in his daughter's childlike voice, froze Thomas's blood. It wasn't just a vague suspicion now. It was real, terribly real. "Who cut the brakes?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice calm. "We don't know," Nora replied. "But she said it should look like an accident." "An accident on the road," Sadie added, her eyes wide. "On the curve near the lookout." Thomas knew that curve well. It was sharp and dangerous, with a steep drop on one side. Without brakes, at high speed, there'd be no chance of survival. "She laughed, Daddy," Nora continued, her voice trembling. "She laughed and said it would be perfect." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the nausea rising in his throat. How could he have been deceived so completely? How had he not perceived the true nature of the woman he'd married? "You both did very well by telling me," he finally said, hugging them tighter. "You're very brave, girls." "You believe us?" Sadie asked, insecurity clear in her voice. "Of course I do. I'll never doubt you." "Stepmom said no one would believe us because we're just kids," Nora murmured. "She's wrong," Thomas declared firmly. "I'll always believe you, always." The girls relaxed a bit against him, seeming relieved to have shared their secret. "Is she going to hurt us too?" Sadie asked after a moment of silence. The question made Thomas's heart ache. "No, sweetheart. I'll never let that happen." "Promise?" "I promise." And it was a promise he intended to keep at any cost. Thomas stayed with his daughters for another hour, reading stories and trying to bring them back to a sense of normalcy. When they finally seemed relaxed enough, he helped them with their bedtime routine, brushing teeth, putting on pajamas, saying the prayers Sarah had taught them. "Good night, princesses," he said, kissing each one on the forehead. "Daddy's here, very close. If you need anything, just call." "Will you stay until we fall asleep?" Nora asked, her eyes pleading. Thomas nodded and sat in the rocking chair between their beds. He watched as they slowly lost the battle against sleep, their breathing becoming deep and steady. Only then did he allow silent tears to fall. They weren't just tears of sadness or anger, but of fierce determination. Thomas now knew, without a doubt, what needed to be done. Vanessa had tried to take his life. She planned to get rid of the girls, all for money, ambition, a partnership with Leo Maddox that had likely been arranged far earlier than he'd imagined. As he left the twins' bedroom quietly, Thomas felt the weight of the truth pressing on his chest. The pain now had a name, and two small but certain voices had exposed the betrayal in its rawest form. Now it was a matter of protecting his daughters and ensuring Vanessa could never threaten them again. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be clean, but Thomas would do whatever was necessary, because some words, once spoken, cannot be ignored. Some truths, once revealed, demand action. And the words of his daughters, painful as they were, had finally opened his eyes. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the master bedroom as Thomas opened his eyes. He had slept in the guest room again, claiming he didn't want to disturb Vanessa with his restless sleep after the incident. The truth was, he couldn't lie next to her without feeling repulsion and fear. He looked at the clock, 6:15 a.m. Vanessa usually woke at 7. He had enough time to put his plan into motion. He rose silently and went into the bathroom, looking at himself in the mirror. Dark circles underscored his face, but his eyes held renewed determination. After a quick shower, Thomas got dressed and went down to the kitchen. Rosa hadn't arrived yet. She usually came at 7:30. He made coffee and sat at the table with his laptop, sending a few encrypted emails to his attorney and to a private investigator he'd hired the previous day. At 7:05, he heard light footsteps on the stairs. He closed the laptop quickly and put on a neutral, almost resigned expression. The mask he'd decided to wear, that of a man shaken by the incident, but beginning to accept the official version that an outsider had sabotaged his car. "Good morning," Vanessa's melodic voice sounded behind him. She came over and kissed the top of his head affectionately. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep much," Thomas replied, forcing a tired smile. "The police called last night after you went to bed," Vanessa commented, pouring herself some coffee. "They said they're stepping up patrols around the property, just to be safe." "That's good." Vanessa sat down across from him, seeming perfectly calm and well-rested. She wore a silk nightgown under a thin robe, her dark hair carefully arranged despite having just woken up. It was impressive how she managed to keep up appearances. "I was thinking," she said after a sip of coffee, "maybe we should install more security cameras if someone got into the garage without being noticed." "Good idea," Thomas said automatically. "And perhaps we should hire a temporary driver for you, at least until you feel safe enough to drive again." Thomas watched her carefully. Every suggestion sounded perfectly reasonable, exactly what a worried wife would say. But now he saw the subtlety behind her words. A driver would mean he couldn't move around freely and would always be under supervision. "I'll think about it," he replied vaguely. Vanessa reached out and softly touched his hand. "I'm worried about you, love. This has all been so disturbing." Thomas felt a chill at her touch, but maintained a neutral expression. "It'll pass. I'm more concerned about the girls. They seem a bit distant with me," Vanessa noted, frowning slightly. "Have you noticed? They're scared by everything that's happened." "Of course," Vanessa nodded understandingly. "I think we should do something special today. Maybe a picnic in the garden. Something to get them out of this tense atmosphere." Thomas studied her for a moment. She was really good at this. If it weren't for the girl's words, he would have believed in her concern, her desire to make everything normal. "That would be great," he agreed. "They'd love it." Vanessa smiled, appearing genuinely pleased. "I'll ask Rosa to prepare something special. And maybe I'll take the girls to pick flowers to decorate the table. I'm sure they'd like that." A comfortable, or seemingly comfortable, silence fell between them as they finished their coffee. Thomas noticed how everything looked normal on the surface. A couple having breakfast, discussing plans for the day, worried about their children's well-being. A perfectly domestic scene, except one of them had tried to kill the other. "Do you have any meetings today?" Vanessa asked, breaking the silence. "Just a call with the bank at 10. Nothing too important." Thomas deliberately downplayed his schedule. In truth, besides the call, He'd arranged a secret meeting with his attorney and a visit to the police station. Good. Then you can spend more time with the girls. They need to feel safe and to know everything's going to be okay. Thomas nodded, thinking about how Vanessa always mentioned the girls, always presented herself as the dedicated, loving stepmother. Now he saw the performance behind every word, every gesture. The rest of the morning passed with an almost surreal normality. The girls came down for breakfast in their pajamas, their blonde hair tousled. They tensed visibly when they saw Vanessa, but Thomas gave them a reassuring look that seemed to calm them. "Good morning, my darlings," Vanessa said sweetly, standing up to serve them pancakes. "Did you sleep well?" Sadie and Nora exchanged looks before nodding timidly. "We were thinking of having a picnic today," Thomas said, trying to ease the tension. "What do you think?" The twins' faces brightened. "Can we bring Sandy?" Nora asked, referring to the family's golden retriever. "Of course you can," Vanessa answered before Thomas could say anything. "I think Sandy needs a fun day too." Thomas watched as Vanessa moved around the kitchen, making more pancakes, pouring juice, acting like the perfect wife and stepmother. Occasionally, she'd touch his shoulder as she walked past, smile at the girls, or make small jokes to coax laughter out of them. Her performance was flawless, but the girls weren't convinced. They ate quietly, only responding when directly questioned, their eyes on their plates. Thomas felt his heart tighten at their discomfort. After breakfast, Vanessa announced she'd get everything ready for the picnic with Rosa's help. Thomas used the opportunity to take the girls upstairs to the playroom. "It's all right," he whispered once they were alone. "Remember what we talked about last night? We just have to pretend for a while." "I don't like pretending, Daddy," Sadie said, her lower lip trembling slightly. "I know, Princess, but it's like a make-believe game, only for a few days." "Will she leave after?" Nora asked hopefully. Thomas hesitated. He didn't want to lie to his daughters, but he also didn't want to burden them with the complexity of the situation. "We'll figure this out," he finally replied. "Trust me." The twins nodded, but the worry remained in their eyes. Thomas hugged them close, silently vowing to do whatever it took to protect them. The picnic was set up in a shaded spot in the garden, with a view of the vineyards. Rosa had prepared a basket full of sandwiches, fruit, cheese, and the chocolate cookies the girls loved. Vanessa spread out a checkered blanket on the grass and decorated the makeshift table with wildflowers picked from the property. Superficially, it looked like an idyllic family scene. Thomas watched Vanessa serve lemonade into the girls' colorful cups, fix the bow in Sadie's hair, and toss a stick for Sandy to fetch. Each gesture was calculated to project the image of a loving stepmother. "It's a beautiful day," Vanessa commented, gracefully sitting on the blanket. "Perfect for forgetting our worries, right?" "Yes," Thomas agreed mechanically. "The girls told me you read 3 stories to them last night." Vanessa smiled, looking at the twins who were playing with Sandy a few yards away. "You're a wonderful father, you know," Thomas forced a smile. "They're everything to me." "I know," Vanessa said softly, touching his hand. "It's one of the things I love most about you, how devoted you are to them." Thomas fought the urge to pull his hand away. Every touch from her now made him recoil, but he couldn't show it. "I can't imagine my life without them," he responded, looking directly into her eyes. "I'd do anything to protect them." For a fleeting moment, Thomas thought he saw something. Irritation, worry, flash in Vanessa's eyes, but her expression quickly returned to one of affection. "Of course you would," she replied, "and so would I. They've become part of my life." The afternoon passed slowly. Thomas remained on alert, never leaving the girls alone with Vanessa, making polite conversation, laughing at the right moments. It was exhausting to keep up the act, but he knew it was necessary. When the sun began to set, they gathered the picnic things and returned to the house. Rosa had prepared dinner, roast beef and potatoes, Thomas's favorite. Another small kindness orchestrated by Vanessa. They sat at the dining table with candles lit and the meal elegantly served. Thomas found himself thinking about how everything seemed so normal. Was this the life he'd imagined when he married Vanessa? A blended family, candle-lit dinners, pleasant conversation about daily life. "You're quiet," Vanessa observed, pouring him more wine. "Just thinking," Thomas answered vaguely. "Anything specific?" Thomas hesitated, then decided to open a small crack in the facade. "About Leo's proposal, actually." Vanessa's eyes gleamed with thinly veiled interest. "Oh, I've been thinking a lot about it, especially after the incident." Vanessa put her fork down, giving Thomas her full attention. "And what conclusion did you come to?" "I'm still considering. It's a big decision." Vanessa took a small sip of wine, watching him over the rim of her glass. "With everything that's happened, you've actually been thinking about the proposal. I think it would be really good to accept." Thomas noticed how she tried to keep her voice casual, but there was an underlying tension, an anxiety she couldn't completely hide. "Why?" he asked, pretending curiosity. "Well, for several reasons," Vanessa said, placing her wine glass on the table. "First, we'd have the support of a bigger company with more resources. Second, we'd reduce our personal risks. And third," she paused, glancing quickly at the girls who were quietly eating, "it would secure the children's future." Thomas smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're right. Maybe it's time to take that step." Vanessa's face lit up. "Really? You're considering saying yes?" "I'm more than considering," Thomas replied, keeping his tone light. "I think I'll call Leo tomorrow and schedule a meeting to finalize the details." "Oh, Thomas, that's wonderful," Vanessa exclaimed, reaching out to clasp his hand. "I'm sure it's the right decision." Thomas noticed how she couldn't fully hide her sense of triumph, her bright eyes, the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her breathing quickened. All signs of excitement she tried to mask as simple approval. "Let's toast to that," Vanessa proposed, raising her glass. "To the future." Thomas lifted his glass to hers, maintaining a bland smile on his face. To the future. Inside, however, he was thinking how different that future would be from what Vanessa imagined. While she likely envisioned a life of luxury funded by his money, maybe even planning how to get rid of him permanently, Thomas was devising his own strategy. The rest of dinner passed in an apparently relaxed atmosphere. Vanessa spoke excitedly about the possibilities for expansion, new markets, and the benefits the partnership with Leo would bring. Thomas agreed, asked the right questions, and fed the illusion that he was completely convinced. The girls remained quiet, observing the interaction with watchful eyes. Occasionally, Thomas gave them reassuring looks, silently reminding them of their agreement. When dinner ended, Thomas offered to tuck the girls in. Vanessa didn't protest, seeming too pleased with the turn of the conversation to worry about small details. "I'll do the dishes," she offered cheerfully. "Take as long as you need with them." In the twins' bedroom, as he helped them into pajamas, Thomas felt the weight of the charade. It was painful to pretend, but necessary. "Are you really going to give her the money, Daddy?" Sadie whispered, as he buttoned her pajamas. "No, Princess," Thomas whispered back. "It's just part of our make-believe, and remember?" "She looked happy," Nora noted. "She did, didn't she?" Thomas smiled sadly. "But don't worry. I've got everything under control." When the girls were finally asleep, Thomas went downstairs and found Vanessa on the terrace, drinking a glass of wine and looking out over the moonlit vineyards. She seemed pensive, almost serene. "Are they asleep?" she asked as he approached. "Yes. They were exhausted." Vanessa smiled and offered him a glass of wine, which he accepted purely for the sake of appearances. "You know," she said softly, "I think things are finally starting to fall into place." Thomas took a small sip, watching the dark liquid swirl in the glass, thinking how fragile this illusion of normalcy really was. "Yes," he finally responded, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I think they are." On the outside, he was the picture of acceptance. On the inside, his suspicion had turned into a plan. And while Vanessa savored her apparent victory, Thomas waited patiently for the right moment to reveal his own game. Wednesday morning dawned with a light mist over the vineyards. Thomas watched through his office window as he spoke on the phone, keeping his voice low just in case. "We need to meet Hal. It's urgent." On the other end, Hal Mercer sighed. "That sounds serious, Tommy. What's going on?" I can't talk over the phone. Can we meet today? I have an appointment at 3, but I'm free until then. Where do you want to meet? Thomas thought quickly. Riverside Cafe in an hour. It's discreet and far enough from here. I'll be there. Thomas hung up and slipped the phone into his pocket. Hal Mercer had been his college friend and one of the groomsmen at his first wedding with Sarah. After 15 years on the San Francisco police force, Hal had retired to open his own private investigation agency. If anyone could be trusted in a situation like this, it was Hal. He went downstairs and found Vanessa in the kitchen, preparing lunch with Rosa. She seemed especially cheerful that day, humming as she chopped vegetables. "I'll need to go out for an hour or two," Thomas announced casually. "I forgot to sign some documents at the bank." Vanessa looked up, a slight furrow in her brow crossing her face for an instant before her usual smile returned. "Sure, honey. Do you want me to come with you?" "Not necessary. It'll be quick and bureaucratic." "Well, don't be too long." "I'm making that risotto you love." Thomas forced a smile. "I'll try to be back for lunch." As he grabbed the keys to the SUV, he still hadn't replaced the Ferrari, which was in police custody. Thomas passed by the girls' room. They were sitting on the rug, drawing with colored pencils. "Daddy has to go out for a bit," he said softly. "Will you be okay with Rosa?" Sadie and Nora exchanged worried looks. "She's staying here?" Sadie asked quietly, not needing to specify who she was. "Yes, but Rosa will be with you the whole time. Remember our agreement? Pretend everything is normal." The twins nodded obediently, but Thomas could see the fear in their eyes. He knelt and hugged them tight. "I'll only be gone for a little while, I promise. Daddy's taking care of everything." "Be careful," Nora whispered, clinging to his neck. "I always am." Thomas drove swiftly along the winding road into town. Riverside Cafe was about 20 minutes from the winery, on a quiet street by the river. It was a place he and Sarah used to frequent before the twins were born, but rarely visited now, making it ideal for a discreet meeting. Hal was already there when Thomas arrived, seated at a back table overlooking the water. Even from behind, Thomas recognized the upright posture of the ex-cop. At 45, Hal was still in good shape, although his dark hair was now flecked with gray. "Tommy!" Hal stood and gave him a firm hug when Thomas approached. "Good to see you, even if the circumstances sound worrisome." Thomas sat, accepting the cup of coffee the waitress offered. He waited until she walked away before speaking. "I need your help, Hal. It's about Vanessa." Hal frowned. "Your wife? What happened?" Thomas took a deep breath and began telling him everything. The brake incident, the daughter's revelations, the inconsistencies in Vanessa's stories, Leo Maddox's suspicious proposal. Hal listened closely, not interrupting, his expression growing more somber by the minute. When Thomas finished, he remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "This is serious, Tommy. Attempted murder is not something you accuse lightly." "You think I'm overreacting?" Thomas asked, a hint of frustration in his voice. "I didn't say that." Hal raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm just saying we need concrete evidence. The girl's testimony is important, but a good lawyer could argue they misheard. And the cut brake lines. Probably the strongest piece of the puzzle, but we still need to link Vanessa directly to it." Thomas nodded, understanding the logic. "That's why I need your help. I want a full investigation into Vanessa and Leo Maddox. Past connections, finances, everything. Vanessa Crawford, right? And Leo's full name. Leonardo Maddox, CEO of Maddox Industries." Hal jotted down the names in a small notebook. "Any idea where to start?" Vanessa said she grew up in Seattle. Her parents died in a car crash when she was 19, and she graduated in interior design from the University of Washington. "I met her at a charity event in San Francisco 3 years ago. We started dating 6 months after Sarah died. And this Leo Maddox came out of the blue, right?" "Yes, 3 weeks ago. Claimed he heard about our winery through a mutual acquaintance, a wine distributor in Los Angeles." Hal made a few more notes. "I'll get on it immediately. But, Tommy, I have to ask, do you have a backup plan? If Vanessa tried to kill you once, she might try again." Thomas lowered his voice. "I'm pretending to accept Leo's proposal. I scheduled a meeting for next Monday. Until then, I'm maintaining appearances, acting like everything's normal. And the girls, they know enough to stay alert, but not so much that they're terrified. Rosa, our housekeeper, is always with them when I'm not home. Hal looked at his friend intently. You're walking a fine line, Tommy. If Vanessa suspects you know, she won't. I'm a good actor when I need to be. Still, be careful. Desperate people make mistakes, but they can also become extremely dangerous, Thomas nodded gravely. I know. That's why I need the evidence as soon as possible. I'll work on this day and night, Hal promised, finishing his coffee. But it'll take a few days to gather solid information. Meanwhile, keep your eyes open and don't let your guard down. Never. The two friends said goodbye with a tense hug. Thomas watched Hal leave the cafe, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. He had finally shared his burden with someone, but that made the situation even more real. On the drive back to the winery, Thomas received a message from Vanessa. Leo called. He wants to move the meeting up to Saturday. I told him I'd check with you. Is that okay? Thomas felt a knot in his stomach. 3 fewer days to gather evidence. Even so, he replied, that's fine. Confirm with him. When he got home, lunch was already on the table. Vanessa smiled brightly at the sight of him, as if his mere presence lit up her day. The girls were quiet, but Thomas could see they were relatively calm. Rosa had probably kept Vanessa busy in the kitchen, away from them. Did you manage to get everything done at the bank? Vanessa asked while serving risotto. Yes, it was quick, Thomas answered casually. Did you confirm with Leo about Saturday? Yes, he was very happy. He'll bring all the revised documents. Thomas watched her excitement, so convincing that had he not known the truth, he would have believed her every word. Her ability to dissemble made her dangerous. The afternoon dragged on. Thomas locked himself in the office, claiming he needed to review some documents before meeting Leo. In reality, he was organizing evidence and finalizing an action plan based on whatever Hal might find. Around 4, he heard hesitant knocking on the office door. Daddy? Sadie's voice was soft. Can we come in? Thomas opened the door to find the twins standing in the hallway, looking nervous and excited at the same time. What is it, princesses? Sadie looked around, making sure they were alone before whispering, We found something. Thomas knelt to get on their level. What did you find? Nora held out her hand, revealing a cell phone Thomas immediately recognized as Vanessa's. Where did you find this? In the bathroom, Sadie answered. She was taking a shower and left it on the sink. Thomas hesitated. Going through Vanessa's phone was an invasion of privacy, but under the circumstances, You did the right thing bringing it to me, he finally said, taking the device. But we can't let her notice it's missing. Where is she now? Still in the shower, Nora said. Rosa said she's taking us to see Mr. Patterson's horses. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Perfect, I'll put the phone back before then. Now go get ready for your outing, okay? The girls nodded and ran off. Thomas closed the office door and examined the phone. It was locked, of course, but he knew the passcode. It was Vanessa's birthday, the one she used for everything. With slightly trembling fingers, he unlocked the phone. The home screen showed the usual apps, social media, email, messages. Thomas went straight to the messaging app. The most recent conversations were with himself, with Rosa, with a friend of Vanessa's named Claire, and an unidentified number. Thomas tapped on that last thread. The messages dated back 3 weeks, exactly when Leo Maddox had appeared in their lives. Thomas's heart pounded as he scrolled through. Did he agree to schedule the meeting? Unknown number. Yes, he's interested but cautious as always. Vanessa. How long do you think it'll take to convince him? Unknown number. A few weeks, maybe. He's stubborn about the family business. Vanessa. We don't have that much time. Unknown number. I'm doing my best. Trust me. Vanessa. Thomas kept reading, feeling a growing weight in his chest. The more recent messages were even more incriminating. He still suspects nothing. Unknown number, no, he's completely in the dark. Vanessa and the other matter. Is it taken care of? Unknown number in progress. All according to plan. Vanessa. Good. Remember, after that, Everything will be ours. Unknown number. Thomas stared at the screen, a mix of nausea and anger surging within him. There was no explicit mention of the car sabotage or any plan to hurt him, but the insinuation was clear. The other matter could only refer to the murder attempt. Quickly, Thomas snapped photos of the messages with his own phone. Then he checked Vanessa's emails but found nothing particularly incriminating. She was too smart to leave obvious traces. He was about to check her recent calls when he heard the shower turn off in the master bathroom. Quickly, he slipped out of the office and went to the kids' bathroom, leaving Vanessa's phone on the sink, exactly where she might have forgotten it. Thomas returned to the office and sent the photos of the messages to Hal, along with a note. Evidence found on Vanessa's phone. Don't know who the unknown number belongs to, but I suspect Leo is using an unregistered phone. Hal's reply came almost immediately. Good job, this helps, but we still need more. I have some leads on Vanessa's past. I'll update you tomorrow. Thomas put his phone away at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Seconds later, Vanessa knocked softly before opening the door. The girls are heading out to see the horses with Rosa, she said, still in her bathrobe with her damp hair wrapped in a towel. I thought maybe we could use this time to talk about the meeting with Leo. Thomas forced a smile. Of course. I was just thinking about that. Vanessa entered and sat in the armchair across from his desk. You look tense. Is everything okay? Just tired, Thomas lied. I haven't slept well since this incident. Understandable. Vanessa nodded, her face a mask of concern. But maybe that will change after the meeting with Leo. A fresh start, you know, something positive to focus on. Thomas studied her intently. How could she lie so blatantly? How could she sit there, feigning concern, when she was part of a plot to kill him and take his assets? A fresh start, he echoed automatically. Yes, that would be good. Leo mentioned we could even spend a weekend at his beach house after the deal is closed. Sort of a celebration. The girls would love the beach, don't you think? A shiver ran down his spine. The thought of taking his daughters anywhere near Leo and Vanessa, away from the safety of his property, was terrifying. Maybe, he replied vaguely. Let's see how things develop. Vanessa smiled, apparently satisfied with his answer. Well, I'll go get dressed. Then we can go over the key points of the contract. Great idea. Once Vanessa left, Thomas let out a long breath. The charade was becoming harder to maintain. Every fake smile, every forced agreement cost him tremendous effort. But now he had something concrete. Messages on Vanessa's phone. Not definitive proof, but a start. And with Hal investigating her and Leo's past, maybe he could gather enough evidence before Saturday's meeting. Thomas looked out the office window, watching Rosa and the girls walking toward the neighboring property where the horses were. Sadie and Nora seemed excited, skipping and gesturing animatedly. That sight reinforced his resolve. No matter the cost, he would protect his daughters. He would unmask Vanessa and Leo, expose their conspiracy, and ensure they never threatened his family again. And if that meant continuing to pretend for a few more days, looking into the smiling face of the woman who had tried to kill him, so be it. Because the truth, as painful as it was about to come to light. Thomas was in his office, his gaze fixed on the vineyard landscape outside. Late afternoon was giving way to twilight, painting the sky with orange hues that would normally fill him with peace. But not today, not while he anxiously awaited Hal's call. 3 days had passed since he hired his friend to investigate Leo and Vanessa. 3 days of forced smiles, pretending everything was normal while watching every move his wife made with new eyes. The phone on the desk vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. Hal's name lit up the screen. I'm on my way, the detective's grave voice said as soon as Thomas answered. I found information you need to hear in person. Vanessa's home, Thomas replied, keeping his voice low. Can we meet in the vineyards, in the more remote area? The lookout. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Thomas hung up and took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. Hal's tone indicated significant discoveries. He went downstairs, finding Vanessa in the living room leafing through a decor magazine. I'm going to check on some vines, he announced casually. The vintner mentioned a possible problem in the northern section. Vanessa looked up from the magazine, smiling. "Want some company?" "No need," Thomas replied, forcing a smile. "It's just a quick inspection." "All right." "The girls are in the kitchen with Rosa, helping make cookies." Thomas nodded, relieved to know his daughters were occupied and safe. He left through the back door and followed the path winding between rows of vines. The lookout sat on the highest point of the property, a small natural platform that offered a panoramic view of the winery and, crucially, privacy. When he arrived, the sun was even lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows over the vineyards. A few minutes later, he saw Hal's black SUV parking discreetly near a storage shed. The detective climbed the path with an ex-cop's efficiency, quick, determined steps. "Tommy," Hal greeted him with a brief hug upon reaching the top. His face was serious, the lines more pronounced than usual. "What did you find out?" Thomas asked without preamble. Hal took a tablet from inside his jacket. "Let's start with the basics. Vanessa didn't visit her mother in Sacramento yesterday." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. She had left after lunch, returning only at night, claiming she'd spent the day with her mother, who was feeling ill. "How do you know?" "First, her mother doesn't live in Sacramento. In fact, from what I found, her parents lived in Seattle. Or rather, they did. Her father died 2 years ago, and her mother moved to a retirement home in Oregon." Thomas frowned. "She always said she was an only child, that her parents lived in Sacramento." "Another lie," Hal continued, swiping the tablet screen. "She has an older brother in Portland. As for her supposed visit, I have evidence of where she really was." He turned the tablet toward Thomas, showing an image from a security camera. Vanessa was seen entering the lobby of a fancy hotel, wearing sunglasses and a discreet hat. "The Ridge Mountain Resort. It's about 40 minutes from here, in the opposite direction of Sacramento." Thomas stared at the image, feeling a mixture of anger and confirmation of his suspicions. Was she alone? Hal swiped to the next photo. It showed Vanessa in the hotel elevator, with a man Thomas instantly recognized, Leo Maddox. "They booked an executive suite for 3 hours, Hal explained, his tone professional and distant. When they left, he walked her to the parking lot. Their behavior was intimate. Thomas felt the blood freeze in his veins. "Were you able to get any audio? Any idea what they discussed?" "No audio, unfortunately, but I hired a lip-reading expert to analyze security footage from the restaurant where they had lunch before heading to the suite." Hal showed another photo, this time of Vanessa and Leo sitting at a discreet table in the hotel restaurant. The specialist couldn't catch the entire conversation, but identified phrases like, "he suspects nothing" and "after Saturday." At one point, Leo mentions something about "when it's done" and "splitting the profits." Thomas remained silent, processing the information. The confirmation of his suspicions should have been shocking, but somehow he only felt a cold resolve growing within him. "And what about Leo? What did you find out about him?" "That's even more interesting," Hal replied, checking his tablet again. "Leo Maddox isn't exactly who he says he is. Maddox Industries exists, but not with the international reach he claims. It's a mid-level company with a history of legal problems, fraud allegations, lawsuits from investors, investigations for unethical practices." "And his connection to Vanessa? Did they really meet at that charity event like they claimed?" Hal gave a humorless smile. "Here's the most revealing part. I found a photo from an event in Chicago 8 years ago. He showed an image of a younger Vanessa next to Leo, both smiling for the camera at a gala. They've known each other for years, Tommy, and from what I can tell, they've worked together before on similar projects." "What kind of projects?" Thomas asked, though he suspected the answer. "It's always the same pattern," Hal explained, his tone grave. "Vanessa gets close to wealthy men, often widowers or divorced with children, earns their trust, often marries them. Then Leo shows up as a potential business partner, interested in investing or forming a partnership. And then, in at least 2 prior cases, the husbands had accidents after signing partnership documents with Leo, accidents suspiciously similar to your car's brake failure." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, the magnitude of the conspiracy finally sinking in. When he opened them, his determination was unshaken. "And those other cases, were they investigated?" Yes and no. One was ruled an accident after a superficial investigation, the other raised suspicions, but evidence was mostly circumstantial. The victims were lonely men, without close family to push for deeper investigations. Different from my situation, Thomas observed. I have my daughters. I have you. Exactly, Hal agreed. Also, I've been checking their bank transfers. There are suspicious movements involving offshore accounts coinciding with the dates of previous incidents. Thomas walked to the edge of the lookout, gazing at the vineyards his family had tended for generations. The sun was now touching the horizon, bathing the vines in a golden glow. For a moment, he thought of Sarah. How she had loved this view. How horrified she would be by Vanessa's plan. "What do you want to do now?" Hal asked, breaking the silence. Thomas turned around, his face set in determination. "I'm going to schedule a meeting with Leo. I'll tell him I've accepted the partnership." "Are you sure?" "That could be dangerous. It's exactly what they expect. If I suddenly refuse, they might suspect I know something. We need to keep them confident, make them believe their plan is working." Hal considered for a moment. "We can use that to our advantage. We can record the meeting, try to get them to make an explicit confession. If we get solid proof they plan to sabotage your car or are conspiring to harm you, we'd have enough to bring them down legally," Thomas finished. "Exactly. But be cautious, Tommy. These people are dangerous." "I'm aware, but I have my daughters to protect." Thomas drew in a steadying breath. "I'll call Leo today. Say I've thought it over and I'm interested. I'll suggest a meeting here at the winery where we can talk freely about the terms." "Good idea. I can set up discreet surveillance equipment in the conference room. And what about Vanessa?" "She can't suspect anything. I need to keep acting normal until we have enough evidence." Hal nodded, stowing the tablet. "I'll keep investigating. I want to see if I can find more details about the previous cases, maybe a witness willing to talk." The two men walked down from the lookout together, discussing the plan's details. When they reached Hal's SUV, the detective handed Thomas a small device. "A high-definition recorder. Activate it before the meeting." Thomas slipped it into his pocket. "Thanks, Hal." "For everything." "Be careful, Tommy. Don't underestimate these people." Thomas watched Hal's vehicle pull away, the setting sun casting ever longer shadows across the property. He took a deep breath and made his way back to the house, each step strengthening his resolve. He found Vanessa in the kitchen with the twins, all laughing as they decorated freshly baked cookies. The scene looked so innocent, so normal. It was almost impossible to believe that the woman smiling at his daughters was plotting to kill him. "How are the vines?" Vanessa asked casually when she noticed him. "All under control," Thomas answered, keeping his voice even. "Actually, I made an important decision today." "About what?" Vanessa asked, her attention snapping to him. "About Leo's proposal. I think I'll accept. I'll call him tonight to schedule a formal meeting." Vanessa's face lit up instantly, her eyes shining in that way Thomas now recognized as calculated rather than affectionate. "Thomas, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, setting down the icing tube and coming over to him. "I'm sure this partnership will be extremely beneficial for the winery." "I've thought it through," Thomas replied, holding her gaze. "I think it's the best way forward." Vanessa hugged him, her expensive perfume filling his nostrils. "This is the best decision you've ever made." Over her shoulder, Thomas noticed the twins exchanging worried looks. He gave them a reassuring smile, hoping they understood this was all part of the plan. "I'm going to the office to call Leo," he said, gently stepping back. "Should I make something special for dinner?" "To celebrate?" "That would be great," Thomas said, heading upstairs. In his office, he closed the door and took a steadying breath before picking up the phone. Each ring reminded him of his renewed resolve. When Leo Maddox's self-assured voice answered, Thomas was ready. "Leo, it's Thomas Hartwick. I've been thinking about your partnership proposal, and I've decided to accept." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by Leo's carefully controlled enthusiasm. "Thomas, that's excellent. You won't regret it." "I hope not," Thomas replied. "Can we schedule a meeting to go over the details, maybe here at the winery?" "Of course, and of course. How about Saturday?" "I'm free all day. Perfect. 2 in the afternoon, then. After hanging up, Thomas stood still for a few moments, looking out the window at the vineyards his family had cultivated for generations. Vanessa and Leo believed they were about to complete another successful con. Little did they know he was closing in on them. Saturday morning dawned with a gentle fog covering the Hartwick vineyards. Thomas looked out the bedroom window, already dressed in a crisp navy blue suit. It wasn't out of respect for his guests, but rather an understanding of appearances on this decisive day. The phone rang. It was Hal. "I'm on my way," the detective said in his gravelly voice. "I have critical information we need to discuss before the meeting." "The girls are already with Jennifer," Thomas replied. "She took them to spend the day in San Francisco." "Great. I'll be there in 20 minutes." Thomas hung up and exhaled. In the last 48 hours, he had barely slept. Every minute spent near Vanessa was an ordeal, maintaining the facade of excitement, while internally he seethed with anger and determination. He went downstairs, noticing how quiet the house felt without the girls' laughter. He felt a pang of longing, but also relief knowing they were safe, far from what would happen today. In the office, he checked the recording devices strategically placed. Everything had to work perfectly. The meeting would be held in the main winery conference room, a location chosen because it had only one entrance and exit, ideal for the planned operation. He heard a car pull up outside. Through the window, he saw Hal's black SUV parked discreetly near the employee's entrance. Thomas stepped out to meet him, away from Vanessa's curious eyes. "Tommy," Hal greeted him with a brief hug. His expression was serious, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. "We need to talk in private." He led the friend to a small office adjacent to the winery, closing the door behind them. Hal immediately pulled out a tablet from inside his jacket. "I found something you need to know before they arrive," he said, voice low with gravity. "The woman you know as Vanessa Crawford doesn't exist." Thomas frowned. "What do you mean?" "Her real name is Elaine Mercer," Hal explained, showing an old ID photo on the tablet. "Born in Detroit, she has records of fraud in 3 different states, although she's never been convicted." Thomas stared at the photograph of a much younger Vanessa, dark hair and a hardened expression. She looked like a complete stranger. "What about Leo?" "Leo Maddox is actually Marcus Doyle. His background is even more interesting. Investigated for extortion, corporate fraud, and even a suspicious death. But he always manages to slip away due to lack of conclusive evidence or disappearing witnesses." Thomas felt a cold resolve spread through him. "They've been working together for how long?" "At least 8 years, Hal replied, scrolling to another image. A small newspaper article. "I identified 3 other cases with the same MO. She targets wealthy men, often widowers or divorced with kids, gains their trust, marries them, and then, coincidentally, a business partner emerges to invest in the victim's company. And then the accidents happen," Thomas concluded, the cold anger solidifying in his chest. "Exactly," Hal confirmed. "In 2 cases, the husbands died under suspicious circumstances after signing papers giving Vanessa or Elaine substantial control over their assets. In the 3rd, the man survived an attempted poisoning, but when he started to suspect, he was found dead, officially declared a suicide." Thomas stood, moving to the small window overlooking the vineyards. "And what about those encrypted emails you mentioned? Did you get more details?" "Yes, I managed to decrypt them partially," Hal said, showing another screen on the tablet. "They explicitly mention finishing the job after today's meeting and making it look like a natural accident like the others." A heavy silence fell between them for a few moments. Finally, Thomas turned around, his face set with determination. "Are the police in position?" "Yes. Detective Martinez and her team are ready. 2 officers in plain clothes are already on the property, posing as winery staff. Another 4 are in unmarked vehicles along the main road." Thomas checked his watch. "Leo should arrive in about an hour. Vanessa is probably getting ready." As if summoned by his words, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Hal quickly hid the tablet as Vanessa appeared in the doorway, looking stunning in a navy blue dress that accentuated her figure. "Oh, I didn't know we had company," she remarked, giving Hal a quick once-over. "This is Harold Jensen, a security consultant," Thomas said smoothly. "With the business expanding, I figured it was wise to review our protocols." "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hartwick." Hal extended his hand, all professional composure. "Likewise," Vanessa smiled, shaking his hand briefly. "Thomas, shouldn't we be getting ready for the meeting? Leah will be here soon." "We're almost done," Thomas replied calmly. "Could you check if Rosa prepared the coffee and snacks for the conference room?" Vanessa nodded, giving Hal one last curious glance before leaving. When her footsteps receded, Thomas exchanged a meaningful look with his friend. "She suspects nothing," Hal observed. "Let's keep it that way," Thomas replied, adjusting the small mic hidden under his lapel. "Is everything set for recording?" "All operational. Detective Martinez is getting the live audio feed." The next hour crawled by. Thomas oversaw final preparations, while Hal slipped away discreetly to join the undercover police hidden on the property. Vanessa hovered nearby, her excitement barely contained, reflected in her nervous gestures and frequent smiles. Finally, precisely at 2 in the afternoon, a black Bentley pulled up to the property's entrance. Leo Maddox, or rather Marcus Doyle, emerged from the car, impeccably dressed in an Italian suit, carrying a leather briefcase Thomas assumed held the phony partnership documents. "He's here," Vanessa announced, her voice betraying excitement beyond mere professional enthusiasm. Thomas followed her to the main entrance. Leo greeted Vanessa with kisses on both cheeks, slightly too familiar for mere business acquaintances. Then he extended his hand to Thomas with a confident smile. "Thomas, great to see you on this big day." "The pleasure is mine, Leo," Thomas replied, maintaining composure. "Shall we head to the winery's conference room?" "I have everything ready for our meeting." The three walked along the stone path leading to the main winery building. Thomas could feel the tension mounting, the barely contained excitement of Vanessa and Leo. They truly believed they were about to wrap up another successful con. The conference room was impeccably arranged. A large wooden table dominated the center, documents neatly laid out, and a bottle of Hartwick Vineyards award-winning Cabernet Sauvignon on display. "Impressive," Leo commented, glancing around in apparent admiration. "This place oozes tradition." "Tradition we're about to expand into new horizons," Thomas said, gesturing to the chairs. "Please, have a seat." Leo opened his briefcase, producing a set of legal documents. "I brought the final version of the agreement, as we discussed. I made a few minor adjustments based on your previous suggestions." Thomas took the documents, pretending to read them carefully. In reality, he was buying time, waiting for the right moment for the next step. "It all looks in order," he said finally, placing the papers back on the table. "But before we sign, I have a few questions. Mr. Doyle." Leo's face froze for a second. "Excuse me? Or do you prefer I call you Marcus Doyle?" Thomas continued, his voice now cold as steel. "That is your real name, isn't it?" Vanessa visibly paled. "Thomas, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth, Elaine," Thomas replied, turning to her. "Or should I say Vanessa? So many names, it's hard to keep track." Leo jumped up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I believe this meeting is over." "Oh, it's not over," Thomas said calmly. "In fact, it's just beginning." As if on cue, the conference room door opened. Detective Martinez entered, followed by 4 uniformed officers. "Marcus Doyle, Elaine Mercer," Martinez announced formally. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted homicide, fraud, and numerous other charges that will be formally presented. You have the right to remain silent." The shock on Leo's face was almost comical. Vanessa, however, shot Thomas a look of pure hatred as an officer cuffed her. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed through clenched teeth. Thomas held her stare without flinching. "I know exactly what I've done. I protected my family from you." The police led Leo and Vanessa out of the winery. Thomas remained seated, feeling a blend of relief and exhaustion. Hal entered the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's over, Tommy. You did it." Thomas nodded slowly. "The girls are safe. That's all that matters." Outside, he watched the police cars disappear down the road that cut through the vineyards. From a higher point on the property, barely visible behind a tree, Two small figures stood watching. Thomas felt his heart clench as he recognized Sadie and Nora, holding hands with their Aunt Jennifer. They weren't supposed to be there, but somehow it seemed fitting they witnessed this moment, the moment when the masks finally fell, when justice arrived. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the relief on their young faces. The masks had fallen, justice had arrived at last, and most importantly, his daughters were safe. As he walked toward them, Thomas felt an enormous weight lifting from his shoulders. The nightmare was over. Now they could begin rebuilding their lives, together, as a true family. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and red over Hartwick Vineyards. On the wide porch of the main house, Thomas sat in a rocking chair with Sadie and Nora on his lap. A week had passed since the arrests of Vanessa and Leo, or Elaine and Marcus as they now knew. The house felt different, lighter, as if an invisible burden had been removed. Rosa hummed in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Jennifer, who had decided to stay a few more days to help with the transition, was tidying up some toys left in the living room. Thomas studied his daughters' faces, lit by the golden glow of twilight. They seemed more relaxed, more like the happy girls they had been before Sarah's death, before Vanessa came into their lives. But there were still shadows in their eyes, invisible scars from broken trust that would take time to heal. "You know," Thomas began, his voice soft in the porch's quiet, "I want to apologize to you." The twins looked up at him curiously, their small eyebrows furrowed in identical expressions. "After your mom died, I buried myself in work," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "I thought if I stayed busy, the pain would be less. And then I got married, and without realizing it, I ended up neglecting you two a bit." Sadie adjusted herself on his lap, her small fingers fiddling with a button on Thomas's shirt. Nora remained quiet, her eyes locked on her father's face. "I should have paid more attention to how you were feeling. I should have noticed you were unhappy." "It wasn't your fault, Daddy," Nora said softly. "She was really good at lying." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest at his 8-year-old's forced maturity. "Yes, she was. But even so, as your father, I should have protected you better." "You protected us in the end," Sadie countered. "You had the police arrest her." Thomas offered a slight smile, running a hand gently over his daughter's hair. "Yes, but I should have done it much sooner. I should have believed you from the start." The girls stayed silent, absorbing his words. The soft creak of the rocking chair mixed with the distant sound of birds returning to their nests at dusk. "That will never happen again," Thomas went on, his voice firm now. "You are my priority, the most important thing in my life." He hugged them tighter, feeling the comforting warmth of their small bodies. "No matter what happens, I'll always put you first. I'll always believe you. Always." The silence that followed was comforting, broken only by the gentle breeze among the vines and the rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair. Finally, Sadie raised her head, her eyes serious as she met his. "Is the stepmom coming back?" she asked, a shadow of fear in her voice. Thomas cupped his daughter's face gently in his hands, making sure she saw the resolve in his eyes as he answered, "She's no longer part of our family. I'll make sure she stays far away from us, forever." Nora hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest. Sadie, after a moment's consideration, smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face and filled Thomas's eyes with tears. "Promise," Sadie insisted, needing that final reassurance. "I promise with all my heart," Thomas answered without hesitation. The sunset deepened into purples and dark blues. Jennifer appeared at the porch door. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced with a gentle smile. "Rosa made that pasta you all love." "We're coming," Thomas replied, but he didn't move immediately. This moment with his daughters was too precious to cut short. Night fell slowly over the property. After dinner, Thomas helped the girls with their baths and tucked them into bed, reading them a story until they fell asleep. When he finally went downstairs, he found Jennifer on the porch, sipping a glass of wine. "How are you?" she asked as he joined her. Thomas considered the question. "I feel alive again," he said at last. "Like I'm waking up from a nightmare." Jennifer nodded, understanding. The girls seem lighter. "Yes, but there's still a long road ahead. They've been through a lot. You all have. Jennifer placed a hand over his. What are you going to do now? Thomas looked at the darkened vineyards, lit only by the moonlight. I think I need to start over. Relearn how to be a full-time dad. Relearn how to live without constantly looking over my shoulder. That sounds like a good plan, Jennifer smiled. And what about the winery? The winery? Thomas paused, an idea forming. I think I need to take a break. Let Carl handle things for a few days. Jennifer raised her eyebrows in surprise. You? Taking time off voluntarily? That's a first, Thomas laughed, a sound that seemed lighter and freer than it had in a long time. I guess nearly dying and finding out your wife was plotting your murder changes a man's priorities. No doubt, Jennifer agreed, taking a sip of wine. And what will you do with that time off? Spend time with my daughters. Just be with them. No distractions, no phones, no meetings. Just the three of us. The next morning, Thomas surprised the girls with an announcement. You're not going to school today, and I'm not going to work. We're taking a trip, just the three of us. The twins widened their eyes in identical expressions of surprise. Where are we going? Nora asked, already excited. It's a surprise, Thomas grinned, handing each girl a small backpack. I've packed everything we need in here. Let's get ready for an adventure. In minutes, they were in the car, Thomas driving along the winding road away from the property. The girls stared out the windows, pointing at horses in pastures and birds in the sky with all the excitement of childhood. 40 minutes later, Thomas parked near a little-known nature park, a spot Sarah had loved and they hadn't visited since her death. A stream of crystal-clear water wound between ancient trees, and a small clearing offered a perfect place for the picnic he had prepared. I remember this place, Sadie exclaimed as they got out of the car. Mom brought us here when we were little. Yes, Thomas affirmed, feeling a gentle wave of nostalgia. It was her favorite spot. I thought it would be good for us to come back. The girls ran ahead, rediscovering familiar paths with fresh eyes. Thomas followed, carrying the picnic basket, his heart feeling lighter with every step. They spent the morning exploring. Thomas showed them how to identify different types of trees, something Sarah had taught him years ago. They found deer tracks near the stream and watched a squirrel gathering nuts for winter still far off. At noon, they spread a checkered blanket in the clearing and opened the picnic basket. Sandwiches, fruit, homemade cookies, and apple juice. A simple feast they devoured with an appetite fueled by activity and fresh air. Daddy, Nora asked between bites of her sandwich, do you think Mom can see us from somewhere? The question caught Thomas off guard, but he answered honestly, I'm not sure, sweetheart. But I like to think so. Me too, Sadie chimed in with the unwavering conviction of childhood. I think she's happy we came back here. Thomas smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. I'm sure she is. After lunch, they took off their shoes and waded in the stream. The water was cold, prompting squeals of surprise and delight. When Sadie accidentally slipped on a rock and landed on her backside in the shallow water, her initial shock quickly turned to contagious laughter. Come on in, she called, now deliberately splashing water at her dad and sister's legs. It's awesome! Nora glanced at Thomas, seeking permission in his eyes. Seeing his encouraging smile, she jumped into the water with her sister, letting out a shriek of joy. What about you, Daddy? Sadie challenged. Are you scared? Thomas pretended to think seriously. Well, someone has to stay dry to drive back, but... Without finishing the sentence, he stepped onto a deliberately slippery rock and fell theatrically into the water, provoking shrieks of hysterical laughter from the girls. Soon, they were all soaked, pelting each other with splashes in an impromptu water fight. When they finally climbed out of the stream, the afternoon sun warmed them as they lay on the grass, gazing at the clouds and calling out imaginary shapes in their contours. That one looks like a dragon, Sadie declared, pointing to a particularly elaborate cloud. And that one is a castle, Nora added. Look at that one, Thomas pointed. Doesn't it look like two girls dancing? The twins tilted their heads, trying to see the image he suggested. I think it looks more like a melting ice cream cone, Sadie concluded, setting off more laughter. The afternoon slipped by in precious simplicity. When the sun began to sink in the sky, They packed up and walked slowly back to the car, the girls collecting colorful stones and interesting leaves along the way. On the drive home, Nora fell asleep in the back seat, worn out from their adventure. Sadie fought off sleep, determined to stay awake. "It was the best day," she murmured drowsily. "Can we do this again?" "Of course we can," Thomas promised, watching her in the rearview mirror. "Very soon." When they arrived home, Thomas carried the sleepy girls to their rooms. After tucking them in, he lingered for a moment, watching their peaceful faces as they slept, feeling a profound gratitude for having them in his life. The next morning, Thomas called Carl, his longtime friend and head vintner. "I need you in my office in an hour," he said. "I have an idea I want to discuss." When Carl arrived, Thomas was waiting with maps of the property spread out on the table and a few empty wine bottles with provisional labels in front of him. "What's all this?" Carl asked, curious. "A new line of wines," Thomas replied, a spark of enthusiasm in his eyes. "I want to use the grapes from the East Slope, the ones we reserve for special occasions." Carl let out a low whistle, impressed. "Those are the best vines on the property. You're thinking of a premium wine." "More than that," Thomas explained, showing him the provisional labels. "I want to create a line called Sadie and Nora, a tribute to my daughters." The label featured the silhouette of two girls holding hands against a backdrop of a sunset over vineyards. "That's beautiful, Thomas," Carl said, genuinely touched. "And commercially brilliant too." "What's the concept?" "Two varieties at first. A light, delicate rosé representing Nora and a bold, surprising red representing Sadie. Eventually, we might expand into a full collection." They spent the next hour discussing technical details, fermentation processes, label design, and marketing strategies. By the time Carl left, Thomas felt more energized than he had in years, not by the prospect of profit or recognition, but by the chance to honor what truly mattered in his life. That afternoon, he took the girls to the East Slope vineyard, explaining his plan as they walked among rows of vines heavy with ripe grapes. "These are the best grapes on the entire property," he said, kneeling so they could see the clusters up close. "And we're going to use them to make special wines that will carry your names." The twins' eyes went wide at the news. "Wines with our name?" Sadie asked, incredulous. "What will they be like?" Nora wanted to know. Thomas smiled, delighted by their interest. "Well, I'm thinking of a smooth rosé like you, Nora, gentle but surprisingly complex, and a bold, fearless red like you, Sadie, full of personality and impossible to forget." The girls took it all in with serious expressions, clearly impressed by the idea. "Can we help make them?" Sadie finally asked. "Of course," Thomas replied instantly. "In fact, I was hoping you'd help me choose exactly which grapes we'll use." He spent the next hour teaching them how to spot the most perfect grapes, explaining how every decision, from the moment of harvest to the length of aging, would affect the final product. "You'll own the winery one day," he said as they headed back to the house, the sun beginning to set. "It's important you learn all its secrets." "Like Mommy did?" Nora asked. "Exactly like Mommy did," Thomas confirmed, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah would be proud, not only of the wines, but of how they were reconnecting as a family. That night, after dinner, they sat again on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. The girls, still buzzing with excitement over the wines that carry their names, talked eagerly about what the labels would look like and who should taste them first. Thomas listened with a heart overflowing with love. The pain of losing Sarah, Vanessa's betrayal, all of it was still there, scars they would always carry. But now something new was growing, a renewed bond between them, stronger for having been tested, more precious for having nearly been lost. The family was whole again. The land remained fertile and generous under their care, and love, finally, was at the center of it all. As the stars shone above Hartwick Vineyards, Thomas knew with certainty that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.